They dismissed her as just another public defender struggling with legal paperwork, a 45-year-old woman who could barely afford a decent suit for court. For months, the prosecution mocked her outdated briefcase and called her cases hopeless charity work. Everything changed when a military prosecutor recognized the small JAG core pin hidden under her collar and realized the overworked public defender was actually a former Army colonel who had prosecuted war crimes at the highest levels. Welcome to Secrets Never Told. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden justice and unexpected expertise, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who served in ways we never knew. The Pierce County Public Defender's Office occupied 3 floors of a aging building downtown, its fluorescent lights humming over worn carpets and mismatched furniture donated by various law firms over the years. The smell of coffee and stress permeated the air as overworked attorneys juggled impossible caseloads with minimal resources. Sarah Chen's office was tucked away on the 2nd floor, barely large enough for her metal desk, 2 chairs, and filing cabinets that overflowed with case files. At 45, she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the obvious signs of financial strain. Her navy blazer showed wear at the elbows, her shoes were resoled multiple times, and her briefcase, a battered leather case she'd owned for 15 years, held together with careful maintenance rather than replacement. "Sarah, you've got the Morrison case this morning," called Janet Williams, the office administrator, poking her head through the doorway. "Judge Patterson wants to move it up." Sarah nodded, gathering files from her desk. The Morrison case involved a young veteran charged with assault during a bar fight. Like most of her cases, it carried long odds and limited resources for defense preparation. "The DA's office is sending their A-team again," Janet added with sympathy. Thompson and his crew. District Attorney Michael Thompson had made his career prosecuting high-profile cases with ruthless efficiency. His team treated public defenders like speed bumps on their path to conviction statistics, particularly Sarah, who they dubbed the charity case lawyer. For her willingness to take on defendants others considered hopeless. Sarah walked to the courthouse carrying her weathered briefcase, its leather surface scarred but still functional. She'd learned long ago that appearances mattered less than preparation, though she understood how her modest resources appeared to others in the legal community. The Pierce County Courthouse commanded respect with its marble columns and high ceilings, but Sarah entered through the side entrance attorneys used, avoiding the main lobby where reporters and cameras sometimes gathered for high-profile cases. In courtroom 3B, Thompson was already set up at the prosecution table with 2 junior attorneys and a paralegal, their matching briefcases and coordinated appearance suggesting unlimited resources. They whispered among themselves, occasionally glancing toward Sarah's table with barely concealed amusement. "Ms. Chen," Thompson said as she arranged her files, "I hope you're prepared today. My client deserves a vigorous prosecution, not another plea bargain charity case." Sarah didn't respond, focusing instead on her notes. She'd learned that Thompson's arrogance often created opportunities for those patient enough to wait for them. Judge Patterson entered, and the morning's proceedings began. The case involved Marine veteran Jake Morrison, accused of assaulting 3 men outside a downtown bar. The prosecution claimed Morrison had initiated an unprovoked attack, while Sarah maintained her client had acted in self-defense. Thompson's opening statement was polished and aggressive. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defendant is a trained killer who brought military violence to our peaceful streets. His victim's injuries speak to the dangerous mentality he carries from his service overseas." Several jurors nodded, their expressions suggesting Thompson's narrative was taking hold. When Sarah's turn came, she stood slowly, her worn blazer a stark contrast to Thompson's expensive suit. "Members of the jury," she began, her voice carrying quiet authority. "Mr. Morrison served 3 tours in Afghanistan defending your freedom. The question isn't whether he fought that night, it's why he had to." Her opening was brief but precise, each word carefully chosen. Thompson's team exchanged glances, surprised by her controlled delivery. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically. Witnesses testified about Morrison's aggressive behavior. Medical experts detailed the victim's injuries, and bar surveillance footage showed the fight's chaotic final moments. During cross-examination, Sarah's approach appeared almost deferential. She asked simple questions, never raising her voice, often seeming to accept prosecution witnesses' statements without challenge. "Ms. Chen," Judge Patterson said during a sidebar, "are you planning to mount a defense? Your cross-examinations seem rather passive." "I'm establishing the foundation for my case, Your Honor," Sarah replied calmly. Thompson smirked at the exchange, confident his overwhelming evidence presentation was succeeding. "Your Honor," he said, loud enough for the jury to hear, "perhaps Ms. Chen would benefit benefit from more experienced co-counsel. The comment drew chuckles from his team, but Sarah remained focused on her legal pad, making notes in precise handwriting. The turning point came when Thompson called his star witness, Detective Ray Kowalski, who had investigated the incident. Kowalski was experienced, confident, and had never been successfully challenged in cross-examination. "Detective Kowalski," Thompson began, "please describe what you found at the scene." Kowalski's testimony painted Morrison as an unstable veteran who had exploded without provocation. His account was detailed, professional, and seemingly bulletproof. When Sarah's turn came, she approached the witness stand with her worn briefcase, removing a thin file folder. "Detective Kowalski," she said quietly, "you've been investigating violent crimes for how long?" 15 years, counselor. "And in those 15 years, how many military-related incidents have you investigated?" Thompson started to object, then stopped, curious about her direction. "Maybe a dozen," Kowalski replied. Sarah nodded, opening her folder. "Are you familiar with military rules of engagement, detective?" "Objection," Thompson called. "Relevance? I'll allow it," Judge Patterson ruled. His interest clearly piqued. "Generally familiar," Kowalski answered. Sarah's questioning continued with surgical precision. She walked Kowalski through military training protocols, stress responses, and situational awareness techniques that most civilians couldn't comprehend. "Detective, when you interviewed Mr. Morrison, did you consider that his military training might have influenced his perception of the threat level?" That wasn't really relevant to the investigation." "Wasn't relevant?" Sarah's voice carried a note of surprise that hadn't been there before. A Marine veteran's threat assessment training wasn't relevant to understanding why he acted as he did? Thompson began to look uncomfortable. This wasn't the passive defense attorney he'd expected. Sarah opened her briefcase again, removing several documents. "Detective, are you aware that Mr. Morrison received specialized training in identifying improvised explosive devices?" "I don't see how that's relevant." "Because, Detective, the unprovoked attack you described began when one of the alleged victims reached into a bag in a manner consistent with accessing a weapon. Mr. Morrison's training conditioned him to respond to that specific type of movement." She presented surveillance footage the prosecution had overlooked, additional angles that showed the sequence of events more clearly. The reaching motion that triggered Morrison's response was visible, though brief. "Detective, if you had received training to identify potential bomb makers by their hand movements, and you saw this motion in a tense confrontation, how might you respond?" Kowalski's confidence began to waver. I'm not military trained." "Exactly," Sarah said softly. "You investigated this case without understanding the defendant's training, background, or psychological conditioning." Thompson objected repeatedly, but Sarah's questions were precise, relevant, and devastating. She wasn't attacking the detective personally. She was systematically dismantling the prosecution's failure to consider military-specific factors. During a brief recess, Thompson approached Sarah at her table. "Where did this come from, Chen? You've never shown this kind of tactical thinking before." Sarah continued organizing her files. "Maybe you haven't been paying attention, Michael." The rest of her cross-examination revealed the prosecution's incomplete investigation, their failure to consult military experts, and their misunderstanding of combat veteran psychology. By the time Sarah finished, Detective Kowalski looked shaken, and several jurors were taking notes. Thompson's redirect was aggressive but ineffective. Sarah had exposed fundamental flaws in the investigation that couldn't be corrected through hostile questioning. As court recessed for lunch, Captain James Rodriguez from the local JAG office approached Sarah in the hallway. He'd been observing the trial as part of his duty supporting veteran defendants. "Ms. Chen," he said, "that was exceptional cross-examination. Your understanding of military protocols is impressive." Sarah was gathering her papers, but something in his tone made her look up, particularly your knowledge of IED identification training. Rodriguez continued, studying her face. "That's pretty specialized information for a public defender." Sarah's hands paused briefly in their organization. "I research my cases thoroughly, Captain." Rodriguez nodded, but his expression suggested growing curiosity. As a JAG officer, he was trained to recognize legal expertise that exceeded typical civilian understanding. During the lunch break, Rodriguez made discreet inquiries about Sarah's background. Public records showed she'd worked at the defender's office for 5 years, previously at a small family law practice. Her law school transcripts were solid but unremarkable, but there was a gap in her resume, 6 years after law school, where no employment was listed. Most attorneys had continuous work history, making the gap unusual. That afternoon, Sarah called her first defense witness, Dr. Patricia Moore, a psychiatrist specializing in combat trauma. Moore's testimony explained how Morrison's military training had created automatic response patterns that civilians might misinterpret as aggression. Sarah's questioning was clinical, precise, and revealed deep understanding of military psychology. She guided Moore through complex explanations with the skill of someone who'd done this many times before. Doctor, when a combat veteran perceives a threat, how quickly does their training take over? Milliseconds. The conditioning is designed to bypass conscious thought. And would this response be considered reasonable given Mr. Morrison's background? Absolutely. His actions were consistent with his training and the perceived threat level. Thompson's cross-examination of Moore was less effective. He attacked her credentials rather than her testimony, suggesting desperation rather than strength. Sarah's final witness was Morrison himself. His testimony was powerful. A young veteran struggling with civilian life, trying to control responses hardwired by 3 combat deployments. But Sarah's questioning revealed something else. Morrison's unit had been involved in classified operations requiring split-second decisions under extreme pressure. His ability to assess and respond to threats had saved lives overseas, but created problems at home. Mr. Morrison, Sarah asked, when you saw the reaching motion that night, what went through your mind? Ma'am, I didn't think. I reacted. In Helmand Province, that exact motion preceded an attack that killed 2 of my Marines. I wasn't in Seattle anymore. I was back there. During her closing argument, Sarah transformed from the struggling public defender Thompson had mocked into something else entirely. Her command of military law, combat psychology, and veteran issues was absolute. Members of the jury, she began. Mr. Morrison didn't choose to be a weapon. His country made him one. The question isn't whether he used force, it's whether that force was reasonable given his training and the circumstances he perceived. Her argument was methodical, devastating, and revealed prosecutorial failures that went beyond incomplete investigation to fundamental misunderstanding of military service. The prosecution wants you to judge Mr. Morrison by civilian standards, but when our country sent him to war, it gave him standards that don't turn off when he comes home. Standards that have kept him and countless others alive in situations most of us can't imagine. Thompson's closing was passionate but felt hollow after Sarah's systematic deconstruction of his case. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning a not guilty verdict. After court adjourned, Captain Rodriguez approached Sarah again. This time, his expression was more pointed. Ms. Chen, I need to ask you something directly. That wasn't typical public defender work in there. Your knowledge of military law and combat operations is too specific, too detailed. Sarah was packing her briefcase, but Rodriguez's intensity made her pause. Your cross-examination technique, your understanding of military psychology, your ability to guide expert testimony, that's JAG-level expertise. Sarah looked at him carefully, weighing her response. Rodriguez continued, there's something else. When you questioned Dr. Moore about combat conditioning, you used terminology from classified training programs that most JAG officers don't know about. Sarah closed her briefcase slowly. Captain, I'm not sure what you're suggesting. I'm suggesting, Rodriguez said quietly, that you're not just a public defender who researches thoroughly. You're someone with direct experience in military legal proceedings at a very high level. Sarah remained silent, but Rodriguez noticed her unconscious adjustment of her collar, briefly revealing a small pin she kept hidden beneath her blazer's lapel. That's a JAG Corps pin, Rodriguez said. Not the regular one. That's the specialized prosecutor's pin they give to officers who've handled classified cases. Sarah's careful composure cracked slightly. The pin was barely visible, worn and faded, but unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. Colonel Sarah Chen, Rodriguez said softly. You prosecuted war crimes tribunals, didn't you? The classified ones that never made headlines. Sarah straightened, and for a moment, her carefully maintained public defender persona fell away entirely. In its place stood someone with unmistakable command presence and authority. That life ended 5 years ago, she said firmly. I'm exactly what I appear to be now, a public defender trying to help people who can't help themselves. Rodriguez studied her with new understanding. Why? You could be making partner at major firm, teaching at law school, consulting on military cases. Why take on hopeless cases for defendants who can't pay you? Sarah looked toward the courtroom where Jake Morrison was embracing his family, free because someone had finally understood his story. Because, Captain, I spent 15 years prosecuting people who'd done terrible things. I was good at it, maybe too good. I put people away who deserved it, but I also learned how the system works when someone doesn't have adequate representation. She paused, gathering her thoughts. When I left the military, I wanted to use what I'd learned differently. These defendants aren't war criminals, Captain. They're people who've made mistakes and deserve someone who understands their story. Rodriguez nodded slowly. Your record must be remarkable. The kind of cases you'd have handled at that level are classified and will remain so, Sarah interrupted. What matters now is the work I'm doing here. As they walked toward the courthouse exit, Rodriguez asked one final question. Colonel, do other people know about your background? Sarah smiled slightly. You're the first to figure it out. Most people see what they expect to see. A struggling public defender who takes cases nobody else wants. response. Outside the courthouse, Jake Morrison was waiting with his family. He approached Sarah with obvious gratitude. "Ms. Chen, I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life." Sarah shook his hand with genuine warmth. "Mr. Morrison, you served your country with honor. It was my honor to serve you." As Morrison walked away with his family, Rodriguez watched Sarah's expression. The satisfaction on her face wasn't the triumph of a successful attorney. It was something deeper. "Colonel," he said quietly, "you found your mission, haven't you?" Sarah adjusted her worn blazer and picked up her battered briefcase. Tomorrow, there would be more cases, more defendants who needed someone to understand their stories. "Everyone deserves adequate representation, Captain, especially those the system has already written off." As she walked away, Rodriguez understood something profound about service. Sarah Chen had moved from prosecuting the guilty to defending the forgotten, but her mission remained the same. Ensuring justice worked for everyone, not just those who could afford it. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the public defender's office early, as she always did. Her desk held 3 new case files: a homeless veteran charged with trespassing, a young soldier accused of domestic violence, and a Marine facing drug possession charges. Cases that other attorneys might consider career-damaging charity work. Cases that Sarah Chen, former Army colonel and war crimes prosecutor, considered exactly why she'd chosen this path. She opened the first file, removed her legal pad, and began the careful work of understanding another story that deserved to be told properly. Outside her window, the city was waking up, unaware that one of the military's most accomplished prosecutors was quietly ensuring justice worked for people who'd never make headlines. The JAG core pin remained hidden beneath her collar, a reminder of who she'd been and why she'd chosen who she'd become. Some battles were fought in military tribunals with international attention. Others were fought in overcrowded courtrooms with defendants nobody else wanted to represent. Both kinds of battles mattered. Both kinds of service honored the same principles. And Sarah Chen had learned that sometimes the most important victories happened when nobody was watching, when success was measured not in career advancement, but in lives redirected toward hope instead of prison. Have you ever encountered someone whose quiet competence suggested depths you couldn't comprehend? Someone whose service remained largely invisible, but whose impact was profound? Share their story in the comments below. And if you believe these hidden heroes deserve recognition, subscribe to help us honor those who served in ways we're only beginning to understand.